Hello. Per Jackie's request to make a summary of my presentation that I had on Friday at the Greensboro Seventh-day Adventist Church, I am making this recording with just few highlights of the data that I shared, along with some recommendations. We mentioned that as we age, all body cells, tissues, organs, and systems are affected. And here's an example of what is happening to our vascular system. As we age, we secrete less of a compound called nitric oxide, and this results in a variety of detrimental changes. Number one, in increased production of a group of compounds that scientists refer to as reactive oxygen species. These are detrimental compounds, and among other things, they cause stiffness and thickness of arteries. This in change results in increased systolic and diastolic blood pressure. In addition, a decreased synthesis of nitric oxide causes platelet aggregation. What that means is that platelets, which are blood cells, stick together. And because they stick together, they may actually get stuck in the smallest blood vessels. In addition, these changes include inflammation of vascular surfaces or arterial surfaces, which means that there is a arteriosclerotic process that is taking place already in these areas with inflammation. Consequently, we are at an increased risk of developing heart disease, including heart attack, and also developing stroke. The question is, can anything be done to reverse or at the least slow down the process? This quote indicates why I answered yes to this question. Consistent evidence indicates that N3 fatty acids, the term N3 is the same as omega-3 fatty acids. You may have heard of the omega-3 fatty acids that are actually beneficial to our health. So these fatty acids contribute substantially to lowering coronary heart disease mortality risk, attributable to reduced arrhythmic death in the primary prevention setting and after an initial cardiac event or secondary prevention. Primary prevention means among people who do not have heart disease yet. Secondary prevention means among people who may have had a heart attack or stroke. And so intake of these fatty acids would then decrease risk of developing more complications. What am I referring to? When we look at fats, scientists refer to fats as fatty acids, and we actually have several different types, including saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated. In the polyunsaturated category, we have two groups, omega-3, which oftentimes are also referred to as simply N3, and omega-6. The quote I just read referred to the omega-3 or N3 family of fatty acids, which include, among others, alpha-linolenic acid, EPA, and DHA. And the two important ones are EPA and especially DHA. Here is the reason why these fatty acids are important. Notice that in this graph we have a relative risk of developing, or rather dying, I should say, of coronary heart disease based off intake of EPA and DHA. Okay, this line that we see here shows that with certain intake we have a steep decline in the risk of dying due to coronary heart disease. And if I was to draw a line here, we will see that the dose of a little over 250, maybe 300 milligrams is associated with this steep decline. Past that amount of intake, we see a gradual and smaller decline, and then no additional protective effect with higher intake. And so notice in this quote we read that serving per week of oily fish or 250 to 500 milligrams of EPA and DHA taken, for example, as supplements would be associated with about 25 to 50% lower risk of coronary heart disease death. And interestingly enough, the benefits of ingesting these fatty acids go beyond cardiovascular disease. Here we have an example. This study looked at the impact of intake of both of these fatty acids, EPA and DHA, on the risk of depression. We can see here that as intake increases, indicative by these numbers here on the horizontal line, we find again a decreased risk of being diagnosed with depression. We actually also find that again these fatty acids associated with reduced risk of other health conditions, and here is yet another example, cognitive decline. Notice daily entry polyunsaturated fatty acids, that's again the omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, supplements intake was significantly associated with lower risk of cognitive decline. And this number, 0.37, means 63% lower risk of cognitive decline in comparison to people who did not take these supplements. And so my recommendation based on the data I just summarized here and additional data that I shared on Friday was that we should be using algal-derived EPA and DHA supplements in the amount of 250 to 500 milligrams per day. Algal-derived means that they were not derived from fish, but rather from seaweed or plant sources. Okay? The reason why is because if they are derived from fish, they may be derived from unclean fish that as Christians we do not want to ingest. But algal-derived means that they were again derived from plant foods. Okay? So when we add the amount of EPA fatty acids plus DHA fatty acids, the sum should be somewhere between 250 to 500 milligrams per day. And here I have two examples of this fatty acid. Notice algae, omega, and then here is another term which says 100% vegetarian omega-3, and the same is here. These are two different ones, but there are different brands also in different supplemental stores. I don't recommend any specific brand. I recommend the specific dose, which is listed here, 250 to 500 milligrams rather per day. And so when I go to a supplemental store, I look for a cheaper one, or the cheapest one, as long as I get this amount per serving. And the serving may be based on either one capsule or two capsules. That's something that we would have to look at the label. We would have to look at what is called supplemental facts. And in the supplemental facts table, it will say EPA or eicosapentaenoic acid and the amount, and DHA or docosahexaenoic acid, and again the amount. We just add up the amount, and it should be somewhere between this one. Okay, so that's a brief summary of my lecture that I had on Friday. Thank you.